I think many of these players, this is an incredibly talented draft class. It is deep. It is tall. Like that, even just that self, you have a lot of the mechanics. These players are going to have the mechanics to play professional basketball. But the schedule is tricky, and I think the transition is always harder than people expect. I just don't want the rest of this week to go by without talking a little bit about the WNBA draft because it occurs. And I think maybe that's a good place to start, which is the draft is so fast. Like, this is now a speed run for these college seniors who are leaving college basketball to go pro. The Final Four was just, 3-4 days ago, and the draft is on Monday. There's just no time. Training camp starts soon. The WNBA season starts soon. I go back and forth on how I feel about this. I think that I understand, obviously, just the logistics of, college basketball being fall to spring and then the WNBA being a summer league. That just kind of is what it is. Much bigger questions to ask before changing that. But also, I understand that the momentum is also pretty exciting, right? We just saw these huge college stars play in the Final Four. They play their last game for their programs, and now they're going to go play in the WNBA. We're going to go watch them be drafted, and we're going to know now where we can root for these players in the dub. It's great. Really nice. However, I think it's very hard on these players themselves. I actually got a chance to talk to Haley Jones last week at the Final Four. She's a player that graduated from Stanford and now plays for the Atlanta Dream. She's moving into her second year. So she just did this. She just did this whole process of being in college, going into your rookie year. And it sounds like the rookie wall is real. I think when we talk about expectations of some of these huge stars going to the WNBA, like Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, Cameron Brink, Camila Cardoso, some of the reasons why they might have rough rookie years is not even necessarily the switch in quality of play, though that is a factor, but just think of the schedule, right? You're going to school. You're trying to graduate from college, first of all. Jones told me that she was still taking classes online while she was in training camp because Stanford's on quarters. Like, you're still trying to literally graduate from college with your degree. You have just played through this huge emotional and physically taxing tournament, no matter how far you went, but some of these players went very far. You're drafted, and suddenly you're moving into training camp, where the way Jones described it was, college, you're like, it's kind of your job to play basketball. Certainly, like, it's important and it's a big part of how you want to build your career going forward. But suddenly you're competing against people where this is their job. This is paying their mortgage. This is paying for their kids' school. This is, this is their job, capital J. And that mental switch, I think, is sometimes hard for players to figure out what that means for them and to figure out what that means for players who've been doing this for longer. Like, you're in camp, you're doing drills, and there is someone who's maybe doing this drill a little bit sharper than you because she's been doing it for the last 3 or 4 years, and you're trying to build your way onto a squad. I think many of these players, this is an incredibly talented draft class. It is deep. It is tall. Like that, even just that self, you have a lot of the mechanics. These players are going to have the mechanics to play professional basketball. But the schedule is tricky. And I think the transition is always harder than people expect. We always joke in soccer that NWSL players show up for NWSL camp being the best player on their college team, the best team in that program, or best player on that program. They go to the pros and they're surrounded by players who are that exact same thing. They're like, that you're not special if you're the best player at your college team. So was I, and so was I, and so was I, and so was I. And also, I've been doing this for longer. I know this coach. I know these drills. I know how to execute all of this stuff a little bit sharper. So be patient with these players. But I also just love drafts because I think just the joy, I think, to see dreams come true is always really, really fun to see. Real quick, I just want to go through the draft order. We'll do a full recap of this on next week's show, but just to prep people. Now, this is, again, just as of Wednesday, April 10th. These draft picks do tend to move sometimes. This is the first round, which is what we're going to focus on because I think people also realize just sort of the uphill climb that second and third rounders get trying to make it onto rosters in their first year. So the first round, number 1, Indiana Fever. Number 2, LA Sparks. 3, Chicago Sky. 4, LA Sparks. 5, Dallas Wings. 6, Washington Mystics. 7, Minnesota Lynx. 8, Chicago Sky. 9, Dallas Wings. 10, Connecticut Sun. 11, New York Liberty. And 12, Atlanta Dream. So obviously there are some teams that have multiple picks in this first round. Good year to have those draft assets. Pretty much understood at this point that the Indiana Fever are going to take Caitlin Clark number 1. Not only is that just sort of the consensus in terms of on the court, but you can even just see players like are already talking about it like as a something that is obviously going to happen. You're seeing teams start to market it. You're seeing Indiana start to market it. I think it's pretty obvious. Number 2 and number 3, kind of interesting to me, going to be honest, just based on how players played in the tournament. Actually, let's say the rest of the lottery picks, I think, are interesting. There's a general consensus, and I agree with this, that the 4 lottery picks are going to be Caitlin Clark, Cameron Brink, Rickea Jackson, and Camila Cardoso. But in what order is kind of fascinating, especially with LA having 2 of those picks. Clark goes first. We know that. We're comfy with that. Brink had a little bit of an up and down tournament. Rickea Jackson actually had a great tournament, but she didn't play for very long. She didn't get as much tape against those really, really good teams just because Tennessee bowed out in the Sweet 16. And Camila Cardoso had a great tournament. She answered, I think, a lot of questions that people had about her in terms of her professional adaptability later in this tournament, whether it is kind of her ability to like impose her will in the paint, some of her footwork, her ability to catch offensive rebounds. She answered a lot of those questions. I'm going to stick with, I think, the lineup that people have been talking about for a longer time, which is going to be close maybe to number 1, Clark, number 2, Brink, number 3, Jackson to the Sky, and number 4, Cardoso to the Sparks. So that would be the Sparks picking up both Brink and Cardoso in the lottery picks of this first round. They have some needs that they need to figure out. I know that Azurá Stevens recently got surgery on her arm, so I don't know how they're dealing with sort of needing bigs. But I also think that this is the kind of draft where it's a little bit closer to just kind of picking the best player available. I think sometimes you can, especially in the WNBA where the rosters are so small and there's a lot of player movement and there's a lot of different ways that you can play and you can adapt. Sometimes teams overthink it and they maybe overthink some of the needs that they feel like they need this year, as opposed to taking the best talent available and understanding that even if there isn't always that perfect fit, that's going to be a good asset for the future. I would like to see, like I said, I would like to see this guy take Rickea Jackson. I think she would be a really good fit for them. I think the Sparks replacing Nneka Ogwumike, they need some of that length. And obviously they're just kind of building for the future. And then just to shout out some of the other players I think are going to go round 1. I do think we're going to see, this is a little bit of a dark horse. I do think we're going to see Ohio State's JC Sheldon go in the first round. I think she is a player that people respect a lot for her character. She was really the floor general for that team at Ohio State this season. She's a little bit undersized, which I think is the only thing kind of working against her. But I think when it comes to just sort of the ability to understand the run of play, to get good sub minutes and play good defense, I think that she is a really good guard option. I really liked what I saw from Aaliyah Edwards during the NCAA tournament. I think that she is someone who can draw fouls, which is an underrated skill for a center to have, or a power forward, I guess, to have a big. She played a lot of kind of traditional post for UConn later in that season just because of their injuries. And she's a player that just, again, coming out of that UConn program, I think she's just very well-rounded. I think we're going to see Angel Reese go in the first round. There's been some conjecture about where exactly a player like Angel Reese fits. She's obviously one of the largest stars. She's got a great personality. She's very competitive. She's tall and she can get rebounds. No question about any of those things. The question is more, okay, what time is it going to take to maybe get some of the more technical skills that she's going to need in the pro game in her arsenal, whether it's just footwork, whether it's her jumper. Right now, she doesn't really have much of a jump shot, so it's difficult to stretch the defense with her in the post. What team is the right fit to help her develop those things, because they maybe have room on their roster and understand what her upside is. Another big player that I think people are expecting to go in the first round is Alyssa Pilley. She is a player out of Utah. Again, she has the size, she has the rebounding ability. It's more just how can you get some of the more technical side into her game to fit into the pro game. And then from there, it starts to stretch, right? You're going to see players from notable programs get picked because of their experience in the college game. I think maybe Nika Mule is a good example of that. I think maybe Celeste Taylor out of Ohio State, Mackenzie Holmes out of Indiana, some of these players coming out of the programs that do a decent job of getting people ready for the pros. You're also probably going to see some scouting from overseas. There's always some players coming in, sometimes from Australia or from Europe. And you have to think about sort of multi-pronged scouting. We always kind of focus very much on the NCAA tournament, but there are a lot of diamonds in the rough out there. And I think that you're going to see some teams prefer players who've been playing professionally in Europe or in Australia rather than coming out of the college game. And then from there are some players that maybe were projected to go a little bit higher, like Elizabeth Kitley, but she's dealing with injury. I don't know. I'm fascinated to see how this mix comes together for teams who, many of whom are kind of restocking. We saw some teams be very aggressive in the free agency market. Teams like Seattle, teams like Phoenix, they don't have a lot of room for new players. You have teams that are bringing back extensive, very deep rosters, like the Aces or like the Liberty. You do have teams like perhaps the Sky or the Mystics or the Sparks who have a little bit more roster room and are understanding that they're building for the future and are in less of a win now mentality. All of these things come together in a really kind of powerful way on draft night, and I can't wait to see it. I do hope that people watch. It's going to be on ESPN on Monday night. I know that there are going to be a lot of people attending, which is very exciting in New York. And I can't wait to see the league grab onto some of this, again, sort of bigger momentum coming out of the college game, while also respecting the fact that this is going to be difficult for these players. This transition isn't easy. And I'm so excited. I say this every single week. I can't wait for all of these players to play pro ball. I can't wait to see some of these matchups. The Mercury ran a funny promotion this week, which was kind of already prepping Diana Taurasi versus Caitlin Clark, and I love that. Let's build this. Let's build rivalries. Let's build a little bit of trash talk. Let's see, because I think that you're going to see players like, again, Clark, Brink, Reese, Cardoso. They're gonna take some shots, but they're gonna give some out too, and that's what pro ball is all about. So very excited for the WNBA draft, and we will do a full recap next week. So thanks y'all for hanging out with us. Just a little bit, trying something a little bit different. Don't want to get out of the news cycle too much, and some really, really interesting things going on. Thanks for hanging out.